For this video, we'll be talking about basics of Java, in this case, parts of the class. Now, the parts of a Java class include the fields, the constructors, and the methods. The fields are what an object should know, the constructors are what initialize these fields so that we can put values into them, and the methods are what an object should do. Now, this is the code we'll be using for the rest of the video. You can pause it right here, but I'll be referring back to it later on in the video. Now, the fields are called instance-object variables. Alternative names can also include properties. They hold the data for an object, the record what an object needs to know to do work in the program. They create a space in the computer that will be referred to by the name of the variable, and you can put data, and you can set the variable equal to data, and this data will be then placed into the space set aside for that name. Now, the fields should generally be declared private for now, because you don't want the fields to actually change. You're putting values into them, but you don't want the space itself to be deleted or changed, because otherwise the rest of your code won't run. Now, the fields should be declared after the class and before everything else, and that way everything else can use the fields, because syntax or order does matter in Java, and if you put fields, say, after everything else, then it won't be able to run. It won't be able to use the rest of this, referring back to the fields, because it won't know that you actually made them in the first place until later on. Now, the name class declares two fields, first and last. First is your first name and last is your last name, both things you need to know about a name. Now, the public class name line declares the class, and the fields are right here. The private is the keyword that we referred back to right here, and this means that only this class has access to it and only you have direct access to it, so that way people can change it and destroy the code you've been working on. And the string is the type of variable that this is. We'll be going over variable types later on, don't worry about it. And the first is the variable name. This will set aside a space in the computer that will be referred to by this by the variable name. So make sure that the field that you're actually using is going to has a variable name that makes sense. Otherwise, you're going to get confused later on as you expand into code that goes over say 100 lines, 200 lines, 300 lines, and this is practical. So always be organized, always have variable names, makes sense. And always end every line that doesn't end with the squiggly bracket with the semicolon, so that way it ends the line of code and doesn't consider this preceding line to be part of this first line. Otherwise, you're going to confuse the console and it won't be able to compile/run. Now, the constructors don't actually construct the object, as the name implies. They actually make the object, the class makes the object, then executes the constructor to initialize the values of the fields, so that way you can put values into them. The constructors should generally be declared public for now, because you want them to be able to be changed and used for things outside of the class, though you don't want the fields itself to be changed. And the constructors should be placed after the fields and before methods, because, as I said earlier, order matters. This means that if you want to be able to use the fields that the constructor is initializing, you want to put the constructor after the fields so it knows the fields exist. And the methods are also going to be using those fields, so you want to initialize the fields before the methods so the methods can actually use them. Now, as a continuation, the name class is one constructor that takes two values, a string that's the first name and a string that's the last name, as shown here. To look for a constructor, find something with the same name as the class and has no return types. So it would have the public right here, then the name, which is the name of the class, and string first and string last. This is going to be the fields that you're using, because it's just going to be the class type, the variable type, and this is going to be the variable name. And now this is setting a value to those say fields. That way, say first name is equal to first, so that way you can actually use the fields, and you're going to be using first name as the variable, but the variable is going to be using that the variable is going to be say change to have data, and then this data will then be added on to the first field or the last field if you use the last name. Now, what are methods? Methods define what an object does, session object's behavior. They are specified after the constructors because you want the fields and the constructors to be able to be used by the methods and be referred back to. The methods will also be declared public for now because you want the class to be able to be using, you want everybody to be able to use the methods outside of the class. The types of method we'll be using for now are getters/accessors, or get information from an object, and setters/mutators, set field values. Though you don't need to actually refer to these methods as getters/accessors and setters/mutators, it sounds pretentious. They'll be very technical later on in case, like, say, the AP test asks you about it, or say different programmers ask you about it, but they'll generally won't refer to it as that. Just understand that they're referred to as these names. Now, the usage of field values are not restricted to setters. This means that the field values can be used in other methods, but this is generally the method that uses them. Now, this is referring back to the code earlier on. The name class is methods for setting the values of first and last name. You can find the methods by looking for public, then a type, then the name of the method. As seen here, the public right here, the string as the type, and the get cell, which is going to be the method name. The parentheses right here normally means that there's going to be data in between here, but because this doesn't use it, then it won't have anything inside, but in this method it does, so it's going to have something inside, which is going to be the variable type and then type name. Now, you don't need to know what's actually inside. The concept is what we're focusing on for this video, so just remember, this is how you initialize a method. And the difference between these two methods is that this one is not using the field value, but this one is. So that about wraps it up for this video.